Hey everybody, welcome to the latest edition of Feuertips, in which I offer a tip about PL/SQL, the Oracle database programming language, which is basically the only thing I know about. And then I follow up with a book or a video or something recommendation among my favorites. And then we request one of our attendees to pick from 3 different organizations to which we will donate $25 to help save and heal our planet. And I'm going to change things up today because this has been a special week in some ways, which is I'm going to do my book recommendation first. And it's not really a book. It's a thing. It's like 1,500 pages long. Maybe you can get a book version, but please don't get a book version. Please share my screen, Mark. The book I want to recommend to you today is the IPCC report on climate change on our planet. I'm sure you've seen the news that a collection of hundreds of scientists from all around the world have worked really, really hard to put together the latest analysis of where they see human-caused climate change, where it's going, and the news, as if we ever had any doubt, is really, really grim. You don't need the report, right? You can see the fires, you can see the floods. We are in really bad shape. So what you might want to do is read the synthesis report, the summary, which has an executive summary of 10 pages or so. But the main thing, and I'll stop sharing now, the main thing that I want to talk to you about regarding that report is what we should do about it. So obviously we need our governments and corporations to move radically, quickly, aggressively to change the way everything goes on in this planet. Good luck to that. But in the meantime, and in any case, every one of us can do something every day to help heal the planet. Obviously, we need to get big changes at a systemic level, but we need also for each human, especially those in the middle class, those of us who have the means to consume and not consume, to change the way we live on the planet. So I urge you, every single day, try to do one thing. For example, don't buy something with single-use plastic, and you're helping to heal the planet. Some creature might not die because you chose to not buy that plastic. Go out and volunteer in a nearby park, help remove invasives. There are so many ways that you can have an impact. And you know what? Doesn't matter what you do, whether it's healing the planet, saving a creature, protesting, it's all one piece. It's all one planet. It all works together or it all falls apart together. One last point. This is a sliding scale. It's not like, oh my God, we're doomed. Just forget about it. Don't even bother. Everything we do saves some life, human and non-human. So let's do everything we can. Okay, moving on. In the meantime, we have jobs. We need to keep those salaries rolling in. We need to have some balance in our lives. So when you're taking a break from healing the planet and you're doing some PL/SQL, you might enjoy the returning clause. So we're going to talk about the returning clause today. So Oracle PL/SQL is a fantastic database programming language for many reasons. But one of the core ideas is that it's very tightly integrated with SQL. And in a sense, the way you can look at PL/SQL is it's Ada. It's the Ada language, which was designed for the Department of Defense decades ago. It was named after Ada Lovelace, one of the original software developers of the whole world. And Oracle decided that Ada would be the template for PL/SQL. And essentially what they did was take Ada and adapt it for a database environment. So one of the most exciting aspects of PL/SQL are the things we've added, or they've added. I was never a part of the PL/SQL team, though people think I was. People think I'm the father of PL/SQL. Nowhere near smart enough for that. But in any case, the points of intersection or integration between the two really gives a glimpse of the power of PL/SQL. And one of my favorites is the returning clause. So the idea behind the returning clause is that when I'm executing a non-query DML like an insert, update, delete, what I can also do is say, give me some information back from after I've made the changes that I requested. The common use case for this is that, let's say I'm doing an insert into a new table. It's got an identity column in which the value is always generated. We don't see it, but I need that primary key to do my next step. Well, without the returning clause, I have to do the insert, and then I have to somehow write a query or execute a query that knows which row to get. Sometimes that's obvious, sometimes that's easy, sometimes it's fast, but sometimes it's not. And even better is to simply say, hey, when you're done with the insert, return that primary key to me, pretty please. That's what returning is all about. And in a more expansive view, perhaps, you could think about the returning clause as being something that allows us to easily identify which rows have just been modified. So let's say I'm doing an update across a lot of different rows, and I want to know which of the primary keys from those tables have been updated. Well, I can use the returning clause to get them back and then iterate through them and do some reporting, or whatever the case may be. Let's take a look at some code. So Mark, if you could share my screen, thank you very much. Let's go over to good old SQL Developer. Hopefully it hasn't frozen up. In fact, let's just go ahead and, yeah, just froze up. Okay, so I'm going to be running a bunch of demos, which are also available, big surprise, on Live SQL. So if you go to Oracle Live SQL, you type in the word returning in the search, you'll see a bunch of different hits. But the two that you might want to start with in terms of this Foyer tip is use the returning clause to avoid unnecessary SQL statements, and I'll come back to that in a second. And curiosities of the returning clause. That's the second part of my tips, is diving into the nuances. Let's see if we're back in action. Not back in action yet. Okay, so let's just go in Live SQL. So this is a script I wrote to demonstrate the basic idea, and I'll just kind of walk through it. So here's what we'd have to do without a returning clause. I do an update, and I want to know which rows or row did I update. So I'm going to run a select afterwards to get the information and then do whatever I'm going to do with it. So I just explained the downside of this. The other downside of this is that you have an additional context switch, an additional switch between PL SQL and SQL. It'd be nice to minimize that context switch. So basically the idea is that with my DML statements, I can add the returning clause and it sends it right back to me. And then off I go. Now, one thing you might notice here is I'm doing a returning into, kind of like a select into. This is probably a bad way to do it in the sense that my update could update more than one row, in which case this is going to be a problem because that's a single variable. So what I can also do, let's see if I can find it. Yep. What I can also do if I know I might update or delete or insert more than one row is that I can add returning bulk collect into. And then I fill up a collection or sequence of collections. You can have a collection of records, which wasn't supported for a while, but it is now. And I get all that information back, whatever I specify, and off I go. You can't return an entire row using the row keyword, which is something you can do and update the entire row, but you can't return the row. And I could have multiple columns with a collection that matches it, or in this case, a record. I can have the whole record, every column in the table returned into a record. So that's the basic idea behind returning. Let's go ahead and let's go back here. And now we've got, now we've got something here. So again, that's the core idea. Let's take a look at some of the curiosities or the edge cases. I'll take some questions and comments. In fact, before I continue here, let me pose a question to all of you, a curiosity that I was not able to resolve. Maybe some of you know the answer and you can share it during the call, or you'll get in touch afterwards. If you go to the documentation on the returning to clause, it pretty much covers what I've been talking about. But there's a curious little section here about implicit conversions. So when a statement, let's make it bigger. When the statement that includes bulk collect into requires implicit data type conversions, the bulk collect into clause can have only one collection or host array. I've had trouble reproducing that restriction. So if any of you have an example you'd like to share now or later, I'll give you lots of visibility. You'll be so famous. Let me know. Back to SQL Developer. Okay, so I've got a bunch of different parts of the earth, like the ocean, the mountain, the tree. So let's take a look at the kind of things you can do with returning. So first of all, you can call, again, what I've shown you so far, or just get the different column values and return them, which is certainly the common use case. But it turns out you can have a lot of fun in the returning clause. You can call built-in SQL functions. So if I run this, let's make sure no, I chose the wrong one. Now it's going to freeze up again. Oh, sorry about that. I should remove these other connections since they're not connected to a live database. Let's go to returning curiosities here. Returning curiosities. Where'd you go? Returning curiosities of the returning clause. Okay, so there's my Earths table. Here's my update, returning substring, and you can see that the value of the column itself is mountain. The value that I returned is mount. And notice that you might say, why isn't that uppercase? I uppercased it because I got the value before I did my update. Okay, you can also call a PL SQL built-in function, so not just SQL functions. So here's an example where I'm calling dbms random.value, and I can see that where's my value? Didn't show the value there. Okay, That's all right, because I'm going to show it here eventually. Anyway, it'll generate the random value and do whatever computation you want. Now I can also call my own user-defined function. You're probably not too surprised at that. So here we go, user-defined function. And I got my first 5 characters. But, and hopefully a lot of you would not also be surprised at this, you can't execute a nested function from within the returning clause. So this is a function that's declared within this block of code. It could be a procedure, could be a function, could be an anonymous block. The key thing is that it's defined only within the context of that block or that subprogram unit. When you execute a SQL statement and reference things inside the SQL statement, you have to be able to resolve this at the SQL engine level, essentially the schema level, which means that it has to either be a package specification-based function or a standalone schema level function. Because this is only defined here, SQL doesn't know what you're talking about, even in the returning clause. So that doesn't work. You can also, this gets pretty exciting, you can also execute a select statement inside the returning clause and run some other query against that table, against other tables, no problem. But interestingly enough, you can also end up with mutating table errors with the returning clause. So now what I've done is taken this query or a variation of it, and I've moved it into my function, first 5. I'm selecting from the earth parts table inside my function. I try to call this function inside the returning clause, inside the query, not inside the returning clause itself, but inside a select. And now I'm getting a mutating error. And this is outside the scope. So this SQL function is not executing in the same scope, the same context or transaction context as the update statement. And so it fails. So there's another way that you might get a mutating table error. So in other words, if you're doing a lot of fancy stuff with triggers and then you start doing returning and you start calling functions in a select in your returning clause and you get a mutating table error, don't start necessarily looking just at your triggers. Usually look at the thing you last changed and then go from there. So again, I mentioned you can do a bulk collect. If I'm getting more than one row or might get more than one row, return bulk collect into an array. But it's got to be integer indexed. I'm sure you're not surprised about that. So if it's indexed by string, you will not be able to use it. Hopefully, wouldn't that be great? It may be 23C or 24C. They finally say, whatever type of collection you use, we'll give you the syntax to support it in a sensible way. That'll be great. But not right now. You can also use the returning clause with for all. So this is kind of interesting in the sense that it's different from insert select. So if you have an insert select statement, you cannot use the returning clause. And actually, this is a good question for those of you who know SQL better than I. Does anybody know why it doesn't make sense that an insert select would not allow a returning? It seems like insert select might insert more than one row, so you do a returning bulk collect into. But it doesn't give you a way to, we're not allowed to do that. Now, the reason I offer that as a counterposition to for all is that for all, which allows you to execute multiple DML statements, either statically or dynamically, usually static, can act like an insert select. So in other words, if I have a for all with an insert statement, there's some aspects of insert select that are shared by for all. So specifically, if I have an insert select statement and the table that I'm inserting into has a statement level insert trigger, not row level, statement level insert trigger, well, it fires just once. There's just one insert statement. It fires once before all the rows are inserted, fires once after. The same thing is true for all. Even though it might be executing different insert statements, it's all treated as a single meta SQL statement in the SQL engine. So the insert trigger is only fired before and after the for all statement. But fortunately, with for all, you can use the returning clause. And it's kind of curious because the returning clause has to be inside the SQL statement and also as a clause in the for all statement itself. So I do my returning, whatever I'm going to be executing, and I return into a bind variable, in this case, because it's dynamic SQL. And then I return bulk collect into enames. So returning clause also for that situation. Let's see. Probably I have, oh, that's right. Can't get to that one, but I do have this one. Stop. Don't do that. There we go. But I pretty much just covered everything. So let's see. Right. So let's just show you this one just to prove to you that it works. And I've got one other topic I want to show you, one other curiosity. So updated, got the part for part ID 200, returning the part name for that part ID because there's just one row with that part ID. And I see the answer. Now let's suppose that I took out the where clause. So I just said returning. Let's see what kind of error you get when you really needed a bulk collect. Run this code. Aha, exact fetch returns too many rows. Okay, the too many rows exception makes sense. Just like select into, and you got more than one row. All right, now the last thing I wanted to show you was the performance impact. So suppose that I've got two different approaches that I showed you at the very beginning. I can do an insert, and then I can do a select. And notice in this case, this is where it can get really tricky. I'm inserting and I'm specifying the name that I'm inserting. We won't go into the back. This is actually this. I'll go into it for a second. This Union Buster table is from my third book on PL SQL, in which I decided to stop doing the same old exercises with emp and dept. So I talked about union busting and essentially how they use prisoners to bust unions by having prisoners work. So for example, we have prison firefighters. It's really something, but we need them. We need all the firefighters we can get. Okay, anyway, I can do an insert, then I do my select, or I can use my returning clause. And the question is, which is faster and how much of a difference does it make? So I've turned that on. Let's run this test. I think it'll take about 5 or 6 seconds. So we're going to get this going. And then I'm going to stop and see if we've got some questions. Any questions or comments, Mark, that I should take a look at? Do we have a very quiet group today? Huh? A very quiet group. Wow. Okay. Well, it looks like we're going to do a fast Feuertip because everybody wants to get out there and heal our planet. I love it. Okay. So let's go ahead back. Sorry, Mark, I know I was supposed to ask you to do that, but I did it. Here we go. Now, remember, this is on 100,000 iterations. So inserting 100,000 times. First of all, well, Oracle database is really fast. So with insert select, it took 0.005 seconds. Elapsed CPU a little bit less, as you'd expect. With returning, 0.00322. Now, obviously, they're both really fast. No big surprise there. But that's a significant difference. And I suppose I could run it 10 million times, and then we'd move it up to 5 seconds versus 3 seconds. So the point is, it really does make a difference in terms of performance. It really does cut down on the context switches. And it just makes your code much cleaner and easier to deal with. And there you have it, my tip for today, for this week. All right, so let's move on. I guess, let's see, looks like we do have a couple of comments there. Great tip, thank you very much. Okay, so no questions or comments. Nils, I was hoping you could come up with, number one, the reason that insert select doesn't support returning. I'm sure there's a good reason in SQL that I just haven't thought of. And number two, that implicit conversions and collections, but I'll keep trying it out. Maybe I'll figure out how to reproduce it at some point. Okay, so, well, let's see. Thank you, Claudio, for your comment. And in fact, Claudio, I'm picking you as the person who can pick the organization that we're going to give $25 to help heal our planet this week. So let's go ahead and share my screen again. So this week, what I'd like to do is offer 3 different organizations all doing great work around the world to help save life on planet Earth. By the way, the only organic life in the entire universe that we know about, which you'd really think humans who are really big on their rationality and their clear thinking and their logic would say, well, statistically, it's very unlikely that life doesn't exist anywhere else except planet Earth. But we haven't found any, so maybe just to be safe, we shouldn't kill everything around us. So rhinos are amazing creatures. We'd like to keep them alive, not go extinct. So the International Rhino Foundation, Brazil, rainforest. Let's try not to get too depressed. We just need to keep the pressure on the Brazilian government, led by João Bolsonaro, who is the Trump of Latin America. Really, he's as bad as Trump. And in fact, his position is sliding in the polls. He's coming up for re-election, and he started the Trumpian task of the big lie, basically casting doubt on all the elections. He's probably going to try to stay in power. very bad news for people in Brazil and for all the non-humans in Brazil. So help out the Rainforest Alliance. And finally, we need our monarchs. And this is an interesting organization because not only can you donate for their educational programs and so on, but you can order seeds and you can plant milkweed plants. And hopefully you'll have monarchs in your own yard. So we've got a little bit of milkweed growing. There's actually a pasture about 5 miles away that has thousands of milkweed plants. It's amazing. It's, at the end of the season, I grab handfuls of the seeds, the seed pods, after they've already mostly dispersed, and I throw them around in my yard, and hopefully we'll get more and more monarchs as time goes by. All right, Claudio, do you have a decision? Do you have a preference among saving rhinos, saving monarchs, and saving the rainforest? They're all good. They're all important. But he hasn't chosen yet. All right. Any other questions about PL SQL, about Oracle database that I probably can't answer for you before we close down for today's tip? Claudio, you still there? Pick an organization. So Nils is saying that, okay, well, let's go with Brazil for sure. And I got a comment from Nils, perhaps returning doesn't work. Can you keep it there? Yeah. Doesn't work at insert into select because of the possibility that direct path inserts will be done. And sorry, excuse my ignorance, Nils, but why would direct path inserts interfere with that? And thank you, Claudio, for picking the Brazilian rainforest. A lot of help is needed down there. All right. So direct path inserts, maybe that's it. I don't know enough about database activity outside of PL SQL to know whether or not that should be a strong differentiator. Okay, but it's 11:22. Thank you for joining us for this short Feuer tip. Hope you enjoy the rest of your week in terms of your work. Hope you find time to go outside. That'd be my general recommendation for you in terms of healing the planet, healing yourselves. Turn off the TV, shut down videos on your phone, and go outside. But more than that, be outside. Be outside on your planet as much as you possibly can. All right, everybody. Take care, and I'll see you next week. Happy coding.